What up, though? This is from Vox. 160 years of U.S. immigration trends mapped. America's share of foreign born residents hasn't been this high since 1920. By Margarita Noriega. 2015. U.S. immigration trends shifted dramatically between 1850 and 2013, including changes in the dominant countries of origin for each state and decade, and the total size of foreign-born population. Understand that. U.S. immigration trend shifted dramatically between 1850 and 2013. 1850. There's no argument about the fact that immigrants have consistently played an important part in American history, but the maps based on recent U.S. Census data reveal lesser known facts about immigrant population rate changes over time. It says there's no argument about the fact that immigrants have consistently played an important part in U.S. history. They didn't say whether it was favorable or to the original Americans' detriment. The census shows us that different decades saw changing sizes of non-U.S. born populations. Compare, for example, the largest immigrant populations by country of origin in the 1900s, 1950, and 2000. In 1900, 2.7 million Germans made up the largest total percentage of immigrants. By 1950, an estimated 1.5 million Italians comprised the largest group of immigrants that year, more than a million less than the largest group, Germans, in 1900. In 2000, 9 million Mexicans accounted for a population size that's 6 times larger than the largest group, Italians, in 1950. In 2000, 9 million Mexicans accounted for a population size that's 6 times larger than the largest group, Italians, in 1950. In my estimation, these are not the indigenous Mexicans, or what would be termed the Afro-Mexicans of today. There's yet another story the maps don't help visualize, though: the ebb and flow of foreign-born residents as part of the total U.S. population, which was the lowest in 1970 and highest in 1890. The percentage of foreign-born residents today is closer to that of 1900 than 1990. This is from Swati Sharma, Vox editor-in-chief. Okay, sociological images, the society pages, the U.S. Census and the social construction of race. Social and biological scientists agree that race and ethnicity are social constructions, not biological categories. The U.S. government, nonetheless, has an official position on what categories are real. These categories, however real they may seem, are actually the product of a long process. Over time, the official U.S. racial categories have changed in response to politics, economics, conflict, and more. Pay attention. Between 1850 and 1870, 6.5 million Europeans had immigrated and 60,000 Chinese. Between 1850 and 1870, 6.5 million Europeans had immigrated and 60,000 Chinese. By telling us this, I'm assuming that they're saying that this is perhaps possibly the largest immigration of Europeans here in America. So before 1850, the number was exceedingly less. And the 6.5 million Europeans that immigrated here and 60,000 Chinese, they weren't the king's men and women, okay? These people were coming here for, quote, for the same reasons that the large amount of people coming here today are coming here for, to, quote, work, end quote. Between 1850 and 1870, 6.5 million Europeans had immigrated and 60,000 Chinese. By 1890, the U.S. government was obsessed with race mixing. The year was the only year to include such fine-tuned mixed race categories. However, because it turned out it wasn't easy to figure out how to categorize people, in the next 50 years, the government added and deleted racial categories. You might immediately think, but what do these words even mean? And you'd be right to ask. Spanish refers to Spain. Latino refers to Latin America. And Hispanic is a totally made-up word that was originally designed to mean people who speak Spanish. Part of the reason we have the Hispanic ethnicity question is because Mexican Americans fought for it. They thought it would be advantageous to be categorized as white, and so they fought for an ethnicity category instead of a racial one. This is from MPI. The Migration Policy Institute. We have a Migration Policy Institute. All manner of things. All manner of ways to take your stuff. European immigrants in the United States. And when we think of European immigrants, a lot of us think, because a lot of people hold this idea of white supremacy that and I assume when they say white, they mean European, Caucasian, Anglo-Saxon. People hold to this idea that someone is supreme over them. So when we hear European immigrants, I guess it automatically lines up with these Europeans who were bringing over Africans as chattel slavery. And the beginning of that is said to be 1619. You would think the majority of Europeans were involved in that pursuit. But as we see, the majority came between 1850 and I guess what it say, 1920 or something like that. Don't quote me. European immigrants in the United States. December 1st, 2015, by Jai Zong and Gina Batalova. European migration to the United States has steadily declined since 1960, with a small uptick following the end of communism in the 1990s. European immigrants numbered 4.8 million in 2014. Out of a total immigrant population of 42.4 million, when we say European immigrants, I assume they mean people who came here recently. I don't think they're counting, maybe they are counting the Europeans who are very patriotic Americans today, who are all of European, Caucasian, Afro-Eurasian ancestry, but put a hyphen behind that and put American behind the hyphen, committing identity theft. European immigrants numbered for which, and you are told that you are the minority, which minority, at this point, I don't think minority, and again, this is not coming from a document because we have an article on the screen right now. So what I'm going to say is coming from my mind, which I know in a lot of cases today, it doesn't matter what comes from your mind. All that matters are words on paper or words on the screen. We're told that we're minorities. I'm starting to think minority doesn't have to do with numbers. It's more like a black or African American or a less than. European immigrants numbered 4.8 million in 2014 out of a total immigrant population of 42.4 million. The share of Europeans among the total U.S. foreign-born population plunged from 75% in 1960 to 11% in 2014, as immigration from Latin America and Asia surged to new prominence after the Immigration Act of 1965. Surged after an act. Surged because of theater. Abolished because after the Immigration Act of 1965 abolished national origin quotas that gave preference to European migration. The motivations and demographic composition of immigrants have changed over the long history of European migration to the United States. The first wave between the 16th and 18th centuries, the 1500s and 1700s, largely consisted of English-speaking settlers from the British Isles seeking economic opportunity and religious freedom. Seeking economic opportunity and religious freedom. These were not the king and queen's men and women. These were people who wanted to, quote, work, end quote. They wanted to work. They wanted to be workers, laborers, employees, slaves, indentured servants. Considering the high cost of crossing the Atlantic, so they had to pay their bus fare. Europeans arriving in this area were a mix of well-to-do individuals and indentured servants. From the 1840s to the 1850s, the second wave witnessed the arrival of immigrants from Ireland, Germany, and Scandinavia, escaping famine, religious persecution, and political conflicts. And we are burdened with all these political conflicts, religious ideologies, and hopefully not famine, but something in that category. And this is where it all started. This is where it all started. Let's shake it. Compared to first wave Protestant settlers, the new arrivals were overwhelmingly Catholic. came from much poorer backgrounds. Compared to the first wave Protestant settlers, the new arrivals, remember, 1840s to 1850s, the second wave witnessed the arrival of immigrants from Ireland, Germany, and Scandinavia. Compared to the first wave Protestant settlers, the new arrivals were overwhelmingly Catholic, came from much poorer backgrounds, and were more likely to be young and unskilled. Now they have this huge wave coming from these places in the 1840s to 1850s of young and unskilled, poor Catholics coming to get your stuff. Why would you come here? Why would you leave your family? Because you are looking for something better. But why would all these people, this wave, it didn't say a few people, it said a wave. Why would a wave need to come here? If a wave had already been stolen from Africa. Now, we just learned that there was a high cost of crossing the Atlantic. So if someone's coming to take, from the numbers I've heard, 12.5 million, 100 million Africans, steal them from the land that they come from, and the captain of the ship is going to foot the bill for all those people. Why would waves of Ireland, German, and Scandinavian immigrants be needed here? Something doesn't make sense. Which one is true? Following this boom, European migration to the United States mostly paused during the Civil War. More than 20 million immigrants arrived in the third wave from 1880 to 1914. The new immigrants, primarily from Southern and Eastern Europe, were of different linguistic and religious backgrounds than earlier European arrivals. So seems that you didn't get your tongue, your language from these people because they spoke their own languages. They didn't understand one another, and they probably didn't understand you. The most recent wave of European immigration followed the fall of the Iron Curtain in the early 1990s, when a substantial number of Eastern Europeans moved to the United States to reunite with family members or seek humanitarian protection. Always coming to get your stuff. Who's promising them your stuff? The number of European immigrants in the United States has remained roughly the same since the year 2000. Thank Jesus. Of the 55.1 million European immigrants worldwide, the majority, 63%, resided in other European countries, with the rest mostly in the United States and Canada, according to mid-2013 estimates by the United Nations Population Division. Nobody can stay home, can they? Can't nobody stay home. Why won't people just stay home? The majority of European immigrants who have obtained lawful permanent residence in the United States, also known as receiving a green card, have done so as immediate relatives of U.S. citizens or through employment channels. It's always employment. This is a note. Socioeconomic characteristics of European immigrants from the following countries are based on pooled 2011 through 13 ACS data. This is due to the small sample sizes of these populations in the 2014 ACS and the limited availability of availability of pooled 2012-2014 ACS data. These countries include Austria, Belarus, Belgium, Croatia, Czech Republic, Denmark, Finland, Latvia, Lithuania, Macedonia, Moldova, Norway, Serbia, Sweden, Switzerland, and the former Czechoslovakia, Soviet Union, and Yugoslavia. In 2014, Eastern Europe accounted for 44%, 2.1 million of all European immigrants in the United States. Western Europe, 960,000, and Northern Europe, 931,000, accounted for 20% each, followed by 16% from Southern Europe, 775,000. The top 5 countries of origin were the United Kingdom, Germany, Poland, Russia, and Italy. It seems everyone has abandoned their homes. And now they are known as Americans. Go figure. What are you known as? When did who you are change? Between 1960 and 1990, the number of European immigrants steadily decreased. Between 1990 and 2010, however, the number of Eastern European immigrants increased significantly due to a sizable inflow from Eastern Europe after the dissolutions of Czechoslovakia, the Soviet Union, and Yugoslavia. Over the same period, the number of European immigrants from other parts of the continent continued to fall. Seems that every time there's a conflict, people come here. Close to 40% of immigrants from Europe have settled in 3 states. Close to 40% of immigrants from Europe have settled in 3 states: New York, California, and Illinois. In 2014, 64% of the 4.8 million European immigrants residing in the United States had taken U.S. citizenship, compared to 47% of all immigrants. The majority, 70% of Europeans, entered the United States before 2000, a higher share than the overall immigrant population. While petitioning as immediate relatives of U.S. citizens was the primary pathway for all European groups, in fiscal year 2013, patterns of LPR channels varied by country. For instance, roughly half of immigrants from Iceland, Finland, and the Netherlands, France, and the United Kingdom gained green cards via employment-based preferences. On the other hand, approximately 23% of new LPRs from Moldova qualified as refugees or asylees. A significant share of new Eastern European LPRs received their green cards through the diversity visa lottery: Moldova, Belarus, Albania, Bulgaria, and Ukraine. Don't you miss being a child when you just wanted to get up, go outside, and play? You didn't think about such things. Now, as an adult, you've seen it. No matter how much you want to ignore it, it won't go away. It is what it is. Reality is reality. January 20th, 2022. 1 in 10 black people living in the U.S. are immigrants. And here we go again, this word black. Let's get it out the way right now. This word black is a blanket word that has been used, it seems, to many of our detriment. Anyone who looks a certain way are welcomed here by so-called blacks. And are welcomed and join blacks in being blacks, at least socially. But on paper, it's a different story. 1 in 10 black people living in the U.S. are immigrants. This is disgusting. When has there been a time where everyone who's not from this soil, when has there ever been a time when all the people who are not from this soil wasn't trying to come get your stuff? Everyone wants your stuff. And we can't take the responsibility off ourselves. We allow it. I noticed that one thing that everyone seems to do today, more than probably any other time ever in history, is talk. Talk, 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 talk. On with the talking. 1 in 10 black people living in the U.S. are immigrants. Immigrants, particularly those from African nations, are a growing share of the U.S. black population. Why, you ask? Well, let's step away from the article for a second. Let me just use my brain. Maybe to justify the story that you were always told. Maybe to keep the lie alive and strong for today. By Christine Tamarind Monica Anderson. This picture is of a Somali business owner, stocks her store in Lewiston, Maine. In 2016, yes, a Somali business owner, because when people come here to get your stuff, they come here with nothing. And then they have the story of the American dream that materialized for them. While the blacks tell you that there's someone holding you back from achieving that, while welcoming someone into their arms, embracing them as a new black, socially at least. The black population of the United States is diverse, growing, and changing. The foreign-born segment of this population has played an important role in this growth over the past 4 decades and is projected to continue doing so in future years. Projected. Like prophecy, right? Black immigrant population climbs to 4.6 million and is projected to reach 9.5 million by 2060. Projection or goals. By 2060, the U.S. Census Bureau projects that this number will increase to 9.5 million, or more than double the current level. The Census Bureau only offers projections for single race groups. Single race groups, blacks, a race, a single race, a diverse race, a diverse single race. Between 1980 and 2019, the nation's black population, a word that every time you hear it, it means non-existent. The nation's black population as a whole grew by 20 million, with the black foreign-born population accounting for 19% of this growth. Between 1980 and 2019, 19%, or 3,800,000, while between 1980 and 2019, 81% of the nation's black population growth born in America was 16,200,000. In future years, the black immigrant population will account for roughly a third of the U.S. black population's growth through 2060. So how about us so-called U.S. black population, which only means that you are a subject of the U.S.? That means nothing. You are a non-existent conforming subject of the U.S., aka the indigenous Americans who were here before any of these large waves came here. How about you stop calling yourself black? How about you find out who you are, start with your name, and how about you have others call you your name? This way, the black immigrant population won't account for roughly a third of the U.S. black population. The black immigrant population will only be the black immigrant population. And the other people will be who they are and who they always have been. You and your family. According to a new Pew Research Center analysis of U.S. Census Bureau data, the black immigrant population is also projected to outpace the U.S.-born black population in growth. Now, how would they do that? Well, look at the last few years. Quite a few so-called black immigrants rode over here in all manner of transportation to help themselves to your stuff. The foreign-born population is projected to grow by 90% between 2020 and 2060. There are contributing factors that the indigenous American, aka the black or African American, you do contribute to that number, that by 2060 number. Does Roe v. Wade Ring a bell? Roughly 1 in 5 black people in the U.S. are immigrants or children of black immigrants. Migration from Africa has fueled the bulk of the growth of the black foreign-born population from 2000 onward. In 2000, roughly 560,000 African-born black immigrants lived in the U.S. By 2019, that number had more than tripled to over 1.9 million. And many of these immigrants are newer arrivals to America. 43% of African-born black immigrants immigrated to the U.S. from 2010 to 2019, higher than the shares among all U.S. immigrants, 25%, and black immigrants from the Caribbean, 21%, Central America, 18%, and South America, 24% in the same time period. Roughly 9% of black people are second-generation Americans, meaning they were born in the U.S. but have at least one foreign-born parent, according to a center analysis of the March supplement of the Census Bureau's 2019 Current Population Survey. Black immigrants and their U.S.-born children account for 21% of the overall black population. Again, remove yourself from this designation. The overall black population should only include black immigrants. It shouldn't include the indigenous people, the indigenous Americans, aka what you would term the blacks or the African Americans. It's interesting. Why does everyone want to come here? Why does everyone want to leave their earth soil portion to come here? I would never go anywhere with the promise that I'm going to get free stuff. Black immigrants differ from U.S.-born black population. Among black immigrants in 2019, those who were born in an African country are the least likely to have lived in the U.S. for more than 2 decades. Over half of black immigrants arrived in U.S. after 2000 by Christine Tamarind and Monica Anderson. Almost 6 in 10 black foreign-born people living in the United States immigrated to the U.S. in 2000 or later, according to a Pew Research Center analysis of the 2019 American Community Survey. By contrast, half of U.S. immigrants overall have immigrated to the country since 2000, with 25% having immigrated from 2000 to 2009, and another quarter immigrating from 2010 to 2019. Black immigrants born in the Caribbean, Central America, or Mexico, or South America have, on average, come to the U.S. earlier than their African-born counterparts. This is all the Americas, so it is understandable. African-born black immigrants stand out for the recentness of their arrival in the U.S. 3/4 arrived in the country in 2000 or later, with over 4 in 10 having arrived from 2010 to 2019 alone. Fewer than 2 in 10 16% arrived between 1990 and 1999, and just 10% arrived in the U.S. prior to 1980. There is no focus on connecting you to an African-born black. There is no effort to connect you to an African-born black. This is Oxford English Dictionary. Black. On formal grounds, the word could be from a base related to the Germanic basis of blank. But since this would give an expected meaning, shining, white, there is an obvious semantic difficulty. Many have sought to resolve this by hypothesizing that the word meaning black originated as a past participle with the meaning burnt or blackened of a verb meaning to burn brightly. Comparative evidence indicates that swart shows the reflex of the more usual color term for black in early Germanic as still in Old English, which has gradually been replaced by black in this basic meaning in English. We're speaking of black, of the darkest color possible, that of soot coal, the sky on a moonless night in open country. From a scientific perspective, the quality of being black is due to the absence or absorption of all the wavelengths of light occurring in the visible spectrum. Of a very dark color, especially a shade of red, brown, or purple, closely approaching black. You've heard of the red man before. You've heard of chestnut, of copper-colored. Yeah, you've heard of the red man. Of a very dark color, especially a shade of red, brown, or purple, closely approaching black. Black gained acceptance in the late 1960s, rapidly replacing Negro and colored. Since then, it has been used as a self-designation affirming a distinct ethnic and cultural identity. Terms such as African American and Afro-Caribbean, which gained popularity somewhat later, are often considered more positive since they avoid reference to skin color and any of the possible negative associations of black. I promise this conversation is gonna stop soon. We should really stop having this conversation. This gets more silly every time I speak about it. It really does, but it's necessary. It's necessary because we have people who think that humans are black or white. It's just, we're getting played with. Designating the black population of a specified country or region, especially as a cultural or political entity. Designating the black population, not a particular colored population. The political or cultural population, the political population of a specified country or region. Very evil or wicked, iniquitous, foul, hateful. Of an emotion, state of mind, etc., full of gloom, melancholy, misery, or sadness, very depressed. This is 1562. Okay, let's move on. Pew Research Center. We're back. One in 10 black people living. Here we go with the black. We just spoke about the black, so now you have a better understanding of how disrespectful these words on paper are. These words on paper are one of the things that has diseased us. Is words on paper. It's important today. Words on paper aren't important to people who are enjoying life, who are natural, whose feet are in the soil. It's not important to people who are just being. Words on paper called taking care of yourself, labor, employment, slavery, indentured servitude. Writers called you taking care of yourself, you being self-sufficient. Writers called that laboring. Writers called you the head of the household and called your woman and your kids, your woman and your children, your slaves. 1 in 10 black people living in the U.S. are immigrants. The Caribbean is the largest origin source of black immigrants, but fastest growth is among African immigrants. By Christine Tamarin, Monica Anderson. The vast majority of black immigrants are from two regions, the Caribbean and Africa. These two areas accounted for 88% of all black foreign-born people in the United States. I would think that we would be referred to as the descendants of Africans, as well as the Caribbean people as descendants of African, because that fits better with the narrative that 1 trillion Africans were brought here. Right? Right. Let's shake it. Number of black immigrants from Africa living in the U.S. more than tripled from 2000 to 2019. Black immigrants from Africa have been the primary driver for much of the overall recent growth in the black immigrant population. Between 2000 and 2019, the black African immigrant population grew 246% from roughly 600,000 to 2.2 million. From roughly 600,000 to 2 million. The Caribbean remains the most common region of birth for black immigrants. Just under half of the foreign-born black population were born in this region. Jamaica and Haiti are the two largest origin countries, accounting for 16% and 15% of black immigrants, respectively. Beyond Africa and the Caribbean, about 1 in 10 black immigrants, 8%, were born in South America, Central America, or Mexico, while relatively small shares are from Europe, 2%, or Asia, 1%. So it says about 1 in 10 black immigrants were born in South America, Central America, or Mexico. So those three places have blacks. While relatively small shares are from Europe, 2%, or Asia, 1%. Blacks from Europe and Asia. Jamaica, Haiti, South America, Central America, Mexico, the Caribbean. We have had our share then and now of people from the islands coming here to hype us up, take a little bit of our stuff, and tell us why We can't get ahead. Restrictive immigration policies on non-Western Europeans after the U.S. Civil War slowed the voluntary migration of black people to the U.S. until the mid-20th century. The most recent wave of voluntary black immigration, as well as the arrival of immigrants from Latin America, Asia, and the Middle East, is mostly due to changing immigration policies over the 20th century, such as the Immigration and Nationality Act of 1965. The 1965 Act, theater, words on paper, people acting as if their words on paper mean anything. It's valuable because we value it. If we don't value it, it means nothing. The 1965 Act marked a departure from the United States' previous long-standing national origins quota system. The United States, the occupying force, who has the occupying military, which our own relatives have been members of for hundreds of years. From the United States' previous long-standing national origins quota system, which restricted the ability of immigrants from outside Western Europe to move to the U.S., to a new system that emphasized family reunification and skilled immigrants. Black immigration to the U.S. would later be expanded further with the Refugee Act of 1980. A bunch of bogus paperwork that's passing out your stuff to other people, and those other people gladly accept. The act also paved the way for refugees from countries such as the Democratic Republic of the Congo, Eritrea, and Ethiopia to come to the U.S. in more recent years. The Diversity Immigrant Visa Program increased the number of immigrants from Sudan, Ethiopia, and Kenya, among other countries. Jamaica and Haiti remain top countries of origin for black immigrants. The top 10 countries of origin accounted for 69% of the foreign-born black population in 2000 and 66% in 2019. All of these countries are in Africa or the Caribbean. Jamaica and Haiti have been the top two countries respectively in both 2000 and 2019. In 2000, those two Caribbean nations accounted for almost 4 in 10 black immigrants, but in 2019, their collective share had decreased to 31%, indicating a greater diversity of black immigrants to the U.S., Nigeria, and Ethiopia were the top birthplaces for black African immigrants to the U.S. in 2019. Some countries of origin have seen large increases since 2000. Kenya has seen the largest increase with 348% growth, and there has been an almost 300% increase in the number of Ethiopian-born immigrants from 2000 to 2019. The Somali-born population in the U.S. has seen a 205% increase in the population of immigrants to the U.S., while the number of black immigrants from Nigeria and Ghana have grown almost 200%. Sheesh. Wow. None of these people care. None of these people care that the portion of earth that we call North America, not including Canada or Mexico or any of the places south of those, not including the islands, the place that we term North America, the place that the indigenous Americans call their soil portion. The indigenous Americans, the people who you term Black Americans and or African Americans, the people who everyone is checking for, the people who are the subject of everyone's conversations, the people who are always being spoken of, good or bad. No one thought about us. No one thought about those people. No one thought to just leave those people alone, along with their earth soil portion. Everyone wanted our stuff. They've spoken of waves. But the one wave we haven't seen is the indigenous American going to all these other places in waves. That's one thing that we haven't read yet. And I don't think we will. Why is it that we are the ones who understand that we need our soil portion and our soil portion needs us? The Black foreign population, the Black foreign-born population differs from the nation's overall immigrant population on several measures, including the share that gained U.S. citizenship through naturalization. A majority of the Black foreign-born population are naturalized U.S. citizens, which is slightly higher than that of all U.S. immigrants, 60% versus 52%. Citizenship rates differ among Black immigrants, with South American and Caribbean-born immigrants having the highest rates, 66% and 65% respectively. Just over half of African-born Black immigrants hold citizenship, 55%, while close to half, 48%, of Central American or Mexican-born Black immigrants hold U.S. citizenship. U.S. immigrants from Africa, Caribbean, more than twice as likely as immigrants overall to have refugee status. In fiscal year 2019, roughly 144,000 immigrants from the Caribbean and 92,000 from sub-Saharan Africa. In fiscal year 2019, roughly 144,000 immigrants from the Caribbean and 92,000 from sub-Saharan Africa. This is from the Birmingham Times. New interactive website featuring Henry Louis Gates tracks slave voyages. From the Birmingham Times by Stacy M. Brown. Henry Louis Gates Jr., the Alphonse Fletcher University professor at Harvard University. Sure, he went to Harvard. And director of the Hutchins Center for African and African American Research. Gates is also now featured on a newly updated website, slavevoyages.org. Newly updated website, slavevoyages.org, which contains databases of the transatlantic and intra-American slave trade. The site now offers access to details of more than 36,000 slave trading voyages between Africa and the New World, 11,000 voyages from one part of the Americas to another part, and check this out, 92,000 Africans who were forced to take the voyage, Gates said, and 92,000 Africans who were forced to take the voyage, Gates said. Let's go back up to Pew Research Center. In the fiscal year 2019, roughly 144,000 immigrants from the Caribbean and 92,000 from sub-Saharan Africa. The fiscal year 2019. New interactive website featuring Henry Louis Gates track slave voyages, March 4th, 2019. In fiscal year 2019, roughly 144 immigrants from the Caribbean and 92,000 from sub-Saharan Africa. Birmingham Times, March 4th, 2019. And 92,000 Africans who were forced to take the voyage. Disgusting. Disgusting. The site now offers access to details of more than 36,000 slave trading voyages between Africa and the New World, 11,000 voyages from one part of the Americas to another part, and 92,000 Africans who were forced to take the voyage, the transatlantic slave voyage. 92,000 Africans were forced to take the voyage. They said this and updated it. March 2019, the Pew Research Center. In fiscal year 2019, roughly 144,000 immigrants from the Caribbean and 92,000 from sub-Saharan Africa. This is Henry Louis Gates doing the updates. Admitted to the U.S., but the ways they entered or had their status adjusted varies by region. We allowed this, and we're still allowing this. We're still allowing this. You think that's a coincidence? You think that the 92,000 sub-Saharan Africans, where all y'all swabs take you to sub-Saharan Africa, you think the 92,000 in 2019 who came here, you think it's a coincidence that it was 92,000 that was forced to come here during the transatlantic slave trade? Well, think about it. All the people you see coming here now, why do they say they're coming? They say they're coming to work. They say they were forced to leave because conditions were dire. Foreign-born black people are less likely to be in the U.S. without authorization than other U.S. immigrants. Foreign-born black people are less likely to be in the U.S. without authorization than other U.S. immigrants. There were 625,000 black immigrants living in the U.S. without authorization in 2017, according accounting for 14% of all black immigrants, according to Pew Research Center estimates. By comparison, 23% of the nation's nearly 45 million immigrants are unauthorized. We're just going through their documents. We're just going through their articles. That's it. We're just going through their articles. That's it. This has nothing to do with whether or not I believe or not believe. It's just like the whole God conversation. Words have meanings. The word God has a meaning. But these articles and all this information, I look at it the same way as I look at this idea of God that people have, this creator of the worlds. Has nothing to do with believing or not believing. I don't know. And I ain't scared to say it. I ain't afraid or ashamed to say that I don't know. Adverse possession. Troy R. Covington and Shannon F. Oliver, Bloom Parm, LLP. The concept of squatters' rights might seem like an antiquated notion, but the law continues to recognize adverse possession as a method by which one may obtain legal title to property. The burden of establishing prescriptive titles lies on the party claiming it. Possession denotes the corporeal control of property, a state of actual occupancy, evidenced by things capable of being seen by the eye or of being ascertained by the use of the primary senses. Like discovering some shit. Payment of taxes is not evidence of title and ownership. I used to think that we were just dealing with evil. Oh, it's much more than that. We're dealing with people. We're dealing with things that are unnatural. In Jackson versus Turner 277 GA 58 2003, as support for his ownership by adverse possession of a disputed tract, Jackson claimed that he grazed cattle, that he grew and cut hay, and that he built a barn partially located on the land. But the evidence established that Jackson's use of the tract was not continuous, exclusive, or uninterrupted for the required statutory period. Until the mid-1980s, when Jackson constructed a gate, the property was accessible to the general public and was used regularly by local teenagers for parties, drinking, and carousing. It was also shown that Jackson did not keep cattle on the property during the entire prescriptive period. The jury could have reasonably decided that this evidence demonstrated interruption of possession or lack of continuity and exclusivity, such that Jackson's claim for a prescriptive title failed. In other words, you don't own nothing. You don't own anything. You can't own anything. The only time that something is claimed and it sticks is if the U.S. is claiming it. If you claiming it, it don't stick. And you should know that because at one point in time, before the U.S. existed, and there was America, and us, the Americans, there was no need to say that that soil over there belonged to you. You and the soil were natural counterparts. In Walker, the Georgia Supreme Court addressed whether the evidence allowed the reasonable inference that the plaintiffs performed acts on the property in question under some claim that the property was theirs. The plaintiffs produced an affidavit showing that although Charles Walker, their predecessor in interest, lived on a different piece of property, the lot in question was known as the Charlie Walker Tract. Charles Walker used the property to raise crops and livestock from at least 1937 onward. Charles Walker fenced the property and erected storage buildings on it. One of the plaintiffs assisted Charles Walker in maintaining the lot in question, and he continued to maintain it after the 1957 death of Charles Walker until 1969. The court concluded that continuous farming of property, the erection of fences, and the construction of buildings are indicia of possession, sufficient to support the plaintiff's adverse possession claim to the property. Generally, one claiming title to real property by adverse possession must be in possession of the property for a period of 20 years. However, possession of real property under written evidence of title for a period of 7 years shall confer good title by prescription to the property. We move on to squatters' rights and adverse possession, a search for equitable application of property laws. Human history has been an endless struggle for control of the earth's surface. By some, get it right. By some wicked, mutant. Human history has been an endless struggle for control of the Earth's surface, and conquest or the acquisition of property by force has been one of its more ruthless expedients. With the surge of population from the rural lands to the cities, a new type of conquest has been manifesting itself in the cities of the developing world. Its form is squatting, and it is evidencing itself in the forcible preemption of land by the landless and homeless people in search of a haven. There's no such thing as a homeless person. Everyone comes from the womb of a woman, and everyone is born into this soil, into this earth. All these words on paper is someone controlling what you do, controlling your thoughts, controlling how you behave. At one particular point, it was okay for someone to come near your dwelling, to have some of what you had, because you all had the same thing. You all wanted the same things, to be self-sufficient, and everyone was, because you had to be. This whole idea of someone being homeless and landless, how does this happen? First, You write acts. You form a military. You put someone in charge of the soil labeled as land. You make it so that just because you're born and you come from the womb of a woman and you're born on earth, just because any natural being, it would be, it would go without saying that you were born into a place that is going to provide for you. And it does. But to a wicked mutant of a being, just the fact that you're born into earth doesn't mean that it will provide for you. No. You have to behave in a manner and act in a manner to where this wicked mutant sees fit to provide you with something. The United Nations estimates that 100 million persons have no home at all, while more than 1 billion persons throughout the world do not reside in adequate housing. It's not the homes and it's not the housing. Because I don't care if you put a group of 10 people who are supposedly homeless together. You put a group of 10 people who not dope fiends and alcoholics and all that. You put these people together, eventually they'll start making their own dwellings. They'll start wanting to take care of themselves. Not all of them. Not all of them. But if people can just be left alone on their own soil portion, they'll figure it out. It has nothing to do with the actual dwellings. It has to do with you can't be in a certain place without their military arm coming to remove you. Let's shake it. Squatting on unoccupied lands, buildings, forests, or even garbage dumps become an attractive remedy that squatters frequently practice. Black's Law Dictionary defines a squatter as one who settles on another's land without legal title or authority, a person entering upon lands not claiming in good faith the right to do so by virtue of any title of his own or by virtue of some agreement with another whom he believes to hold the title. Under former laws, one who settles on public land in order to acquire title to that land. And I would like to make something very clear. We, our parents, our grandparents, our great-grandparents, our second great-grandparents, we all have to take accountability for these things that are happening. For the things that are in place. For the acts, the theater that's going on. For the circus that we're all a part of. For allowing the elaborate show to go on. The UN's Commission on Human Rights, here we go. We're talking the UN, the United Nations. Now, not only are we talking about immediate men that you have to pay in order to live on earth. But now we're talking about an extended body. That we are subject to, that some are subject to. The UN's Commission on Human Rights, the Subcommission on Prevention of Discrimination and Protection of Minorities, issued a report illuminating 12 misconceptions and misinterpretations of the right to housing and attempting to dispel the notion that squatters are criminals. Dispel the notion that squatters are criminals. In several nations, including the United States, Germany, and Great Britain, a squatter may gain legal possession of land through adverse possession. Adverse possession is a method of acquisition of title to real property by possession for a statutory period under certain conditions. Gonna have to go back over this because it seems that you can go and squat somewhere of your liking, follow the elements. It says, the next line says, adverse possession generally has 5 elements that a claimant must establish. So you can read those, and I'll have to go over and read it again myself. The Statute of 1623 was the adverse possession statute that many American colonial jurisdictions used as a prototype for their own laws. 1623. Remember, 1619 was said to be your beginning. But in 1623, they were using adverse possession. Why? Why would they do that? These are the king's men. They went and got 100 million. They don't start. They brought the beginning of 100 million here. They don't have to adverse possess nothing. Right? The Statute of 1623 was the adverse possession statute that many American colonial jurisdictions used as a prototype for their own laws. The express goals of this statute were the avoiding of suits and the quieting of man's estates. This statute reflected an early desire in England to prevent the waste of land resources and to force owners to monitor their lands properly. The first adverse possession statute in the form of a statute of limitations appeared in North Carolina in 1715. One early and critical decision involving adverse possession was the case of Johnson versus McIntosh. In McIntosh, the plaintiff claimed title to a parcel of land that was titled to him from the Piankashaw Indians. The defendant's title came from a grant from the United States government. Recognizing the principle of discovery and conquest, Chief Justice Marshall found that recognizing the principle of discovery and conquest, Chief Justice Marshall found that the United States then have unequivocally acceded to that great and broad rule by which its civilized inhabitants now hold this country. They hold and assert in themselves the title by which it was acquired. They maintain, as all others have maintained, that discovery gave an exclusive right to extinguish the Indian title of occupancy either by purchase or conquest. That discovery gave an exclusive right to extinguish the Indian title of occupancy either by purchase or conquest. So your people were here, but because someone else came and saw you here and saw where you live and saw your earth soil portion, that it gave them exclusive right. That discovery, that seeing of you and where you were, gave an exclusive right to extinguish the Indian title of occupancy, either by purchase or conquest. An absolute title to lands cannot exist at the same time in different persons or in different governments. An absolute must be an exclusive title, or at least a title which excludes all others not compatible with it. All our institutions recognize the absolute title of the crown, subject only to the Indian right of occupancy. This is incompatible with an absolute and complete title in the Indians. The 19th century saw the rise of European power and hegemony due to the Industrial Revolution. Whoa, the Industrial Revolution. The 19th century saw the rise of European power and hegemony due to the Industrial Revolution. The Industrial Revolution was, I believe, came after the Civil War. I believe that was a big part of the Civil War, the plantation economy versus the industrial northern economy. The industrial, the urban, as opposed to what was happening in the South. More on that later. Due to the Industrial Revolution and the resulting increase in technology and wealth in Europe. Due to increased technology, European nations found distant areas of the world to be more accessible and desirable as these states sought to increase their wealth and power. Consequently, Europeans established colonies on every continent and every unclaimed area in a quest for wealth and resources. Colonization of the underdeveloped world had a direct impact upon many nations. Look at how development has benefited us today. Now you have developed into a follower. Pressure on and confiscation of land was a fundamental feature of colonialism, especially in East and Central Africa. Even after they departed, the colonial powers left their former territories with a general atmosphere of suspicion of individual land rights due to their emphasis on land acquisition. This lasting influence, although not present in every former colony, manifested itself in flawed property systems that lacked certainty and uniformity of property rights. Furthermore, the instability of property systems resulted in slower economic development and the general loss of individual rights that often had tragic results. Like many squatters around the world, British squatters have become an important part of the communities in which they live, often performing socially important and valuable functions. Squatters in Brighton, East Sussex, have taken over a row of dilapidated Victorian cottages and have turned them into a brightly painted terrace. These squatters include students, a carpenter, a former embalmer, and some women with children. These squatters have so endeared themselves to the community that their neighbors have sent a 1,500 name petition to their local council asking that they be allowed to stay. Does this sound familiar? Maybe we all should become squatters. We should all, hey, let's do this. Let's stop saying black and let's say squatter. think that would be more beneficial. No more black. No more black Americans. Squatter American. Some squatters have had success using the English adverse possession rules. As another example, in 1996, a pair of squatters earned pounds, 103,000, from the sale of the Victorian house where they had lived rent-free for 19 years. Imagine that. Imagine that. Does that sound familiar? Today, 2024, does that sound familiar? It will in a year or two. English law influences much of the law of adverse possession in the United States. In the United States, no city has experienced more urban squatting activity than New York City. New York State's adverse possession laws provides that those who openly and hostilely possess land for 10 years can request title to that land. And mind you, this is all because of acquiescence or non-action. The February 8th, 1996 decision in Walz versus Giuliani was considered by many to be a victory for the squatters in New York City because the court considered the actual merits of the squatters' case. The case represented a critical decision for squatters because the ruling left the door open for similar legal challenges to be brought by squatters all over the city. California law requires the typical elements for adverse possession. Possession must be held either under a claim of right or color of title. Possession must be actual, open, and notorious occupation of the property in such a manner as to constitute reasonable notice of that occupation to the record owner. The occupation must be both exclusive and hostile to the title of the true owner. Possession must be continuous and uninterrupted for at least 5 years, and the occupier must pay all taxes assessed against the property during such 5-year period. Middle-class neighborhoods in California have been invaded by squatters guided by squatters agencies. These squatters agencies have legal standing based upon the 1856 law designed to break up Spanish claims to land after California changed hands. This law allows squatters to enter a dwelling as long as a window or door is open or has been left unlocked. They can't break in. Often squatting agents will look for foreclosed property and then inform their customers of the ripe pickings. The squatters agree to pay monthly rent to the agents. These housing agents give their customers 4 to 6 months in a house and a 3-page disclosure on what they do. In many ways, this type of squatting is similar to the squatting promoted by residential squatting agents in the United Kingdom. This is from U.S. population, 1790 to 2020. UShistory.com. The tendency in agricultural economies for early marriage and large numbers of children resulted in regular population growth during the decades preceding 1830, with only a small contribution from immigration. The tendency in agricultural economies for early marriage and large numbers of children resulted in regular population growth during the decades preceding 1830, with only a small contribution from immigration. Your family, your people were here, and they were fine. The population growth was regular. They were having children. I know this to be because my family, they had from the age of 19 to the age of 30, they would have 7, 8, 9, 10 children before 1830. So all that minority stuff I don't think it has a lot to do with numbers. I think minority is another designation. Again, after 1830, immigration began to grow again. In the decades ending in 1870, population growth dropped below 30% for the first time in the nation's history. Substantial immigration kept the population rising at 20% or more for each decade until 1920. Today, immigration is mostly shut out. Yeah, right. Well, legal immigration. In recent years, the arrival of millions of immigrants from Mexico and other countries, along with tendency of Hispanic households to larger number of children, have been the majority factors in continued population growth. We go to the Oxford English Dictionary. The word slave. This is the online version, the subscription version. A person who submits in a servile manner to the authority or direction of another or others. A submissive or devoted servant. A person who works very hard without proper remuneration or appreciation. Didn't say without pay. It said without proper remuneration or appreciation. Does remuneration mean money, currency, stuff for you working? That's a real question. A person who submits in a servile manner to the authority or direction of another or others. So far, that's all of you. So far, that's all of us. That's everyone. You can say what you want to say, but that's everyone right now. A person who submits in a servile manner to the authority or direction of another or others. Everyone does this at some point during the month. A submissive or devoted servant. Okay? A person who works very hard without proper remuneration or appreciation. Come on, man. This fit the average human being of today's. This is a description of the average human being of today. We talking the word slave. A person who or thing which is completely under the control or domination of or subject to a specified influence. Come on, man. Come on, man. These are descriptions of the average human today. As a term of contempt, a despicable person, a wretch. Being a slave, being that thing, is a despicable person, a wretch. We should have been taught that from a very young age. And our parents' parents. In weakened use, a rascal, a fellow. Didn't it say Henry Louis Gates was a fellow at a particular college? It said he was a fellow. And from, if you've ever seen him, he's also a rascal, right? Little rascal, right? A component that is controlled by or closely follows the action of another component of a system. This is from 1924. So far, everything describes the average human being today. Okay. So we're still talking slave here. In simulative phrases, as the type of a person who works or is made to work hard, tirelessly. Listen. Get the Kunta Kinte shackles on the neck, wrists, and ankles. The Toby Kunta Kinte thing, the the sardine can slave ship and all that. Get that out your head for a second and just listen to this. We're still talking the word slave, the definition of the word slave, in simulative phrases as the type of a person who works or is made to work hard, tirelessly. Do the right thing.